Hello, hello, Vortex. This is going to be one of my common videos where I start exploring a subject, see where it takes me. That's basically my channel: philosophy and free styling and ideas, free association of ideas, I guess, really. And this morning when I woke up, I thought I wanted to talk about a subject which is pretty complicated because it concerns people's identities, which is a core aspect of people's, value systems often. So-called wokeness and woke culture, I guess. Though obviously the meaning of that word, as used in the context of the culture wars, has changed a lot over the last few years, really, in terms of its meaning. And this is one of the main problems with the culture wars discourse in general, is that concepts, words, ideas get just recontextualized and changed and misinterpreted, and that's a real issue that I think blocks meaningful progress in those areas, or just like it being objective. It's just seems like a bit of a game of tit for tat between sort of conservatives who want to preserve this idea of the traditionalism. Where in America it's typically a sort of evangelical Christian nuclear family unit type idea of the ideal society, and then on the flip side they'd say you got people are more queer identified, less traditional, and that for some reason terrifies conservatives, even though that group of people by definition will probably always be a minority, right? Now obviously there's nothing wrong with being gay, bi, transgender, having some sort of trans identity, but your more traditional people will, who are often influenced by religion, will struggle with these. I wouldn't even say newer forms of identity, because they've always been around forever. Gay people have existed since antiquity. It's all recorded in history. You obviously find examples of homosexuality in nature. It's pretty well documented that different animal species can have same-sex attraction. And bisexuality as well, I think, certainly it's across eons of time. You can find examples of that. Alexander the Great, you've got a lot, was very famously attracted to both men and women and had relationships with both, and that was fairly well documented. I think that's a long time ago. It was 2,000 years ago, I think, wasn't it? Or thereabouts. But anyway, where am I going with this? So, generally speaking, I think I do align personally more with a progressive sort of view of the world and culture. I see culture as a thing that naturally evolves with time, and that the more that you get a clash of different cultures, or not even necessarily a clash, it could just be a meeting of two different cultures, you often something new will come out of that. Like a good example of that's like ska music in the UK, where you had two different racial groups meeting, actually, ethnic groups like white and black, really. So it was a bit of a mishmash of black and white culture. But that brought people together, right? So it was a positive thing, and it also made music out of it as well. But so generally, I think the more that you try and seek to understand something that's alien to you, usually just by talking to the people who are part of that group, the faster you're going to get over whatever, like any misgivings you might have about that group, right? I mean, it can That I think people can definitely have that, like just how would you say, biases that they don't really understand that well themselves, I guess, and I think you have to keep your eye out on your own mind in that respect. So make sure you don't fall into a stereotypical view that's based on what, like hearsay, or just basically the news of cultural figures. If you really want to find out about this stuff and find out about how these different cultures function, you need to get into them, right? You need to actually go into those subcultures and find out what they're about. Whether that means, even if that means like you as a, say you were brought up in a religious household, you were like a cis man who's a straight guy, go to a gay club, like, and find out what is the actual culture about. Now, obviously, if you go into, like, obviously, if you did that and you did it with the wrong attitude and the wrong, in bad faith, I guess, then you'd probably not have a good time. Like, and obviously, it could go in many different ways. But generally speaking, I've always found that, like, I've learned more about, especially with trans people, the more this time I've spent, which hasn't been loads, like I've only known a few trans people in my life, the more that I've been able to chat to a few of them, and just, obviously not, you don't hyperfixate on that, because it would just be annoying if every single conversation you had hyperfixated on that part of their identity, but having, like, just questioning them sometimes, it's actually a very useful thing. There's one other thing I want to go over in this that I was thinking about. The other thing I think, though, which isn't so, I don't think I'm very fond of in terms of, like, the more progressive leftist identity politics or wokeness or whatever you want to call it, is a certain essentialism, like, in terms of, so people talk about, like, oppression Olympics, like, if someone has a disability and is a person of colour and blah, 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 then that makes them more oppressed and yada, yada, yada. And, obviously, someone who's a cis white male is, like, at the very bottom of the oppressed. But I think the problem with this is it's too essentialist, really. So I don't want to give quite a controversial example because, I think it's just the two examples I was thinking of earlier. And so, for example, like, if you're going to essentialize somebody, saying, like, all gay people are oppressed, or all gay people are, like, somehow morally different, or better than straight people, or whatever, that'd be a ridiculous statement, right? Now, the two examples I would give of, like, this, again, I'm not meaning to say this is, like, as a generalization, it's just more of a observation. So Jeffrey Dahmer, right, was a gay serial killer. Ernst Röhm, gay Nazi, leader of the SA. Now, they happened to be gay men. They were gay men in times and contexts when that wasn't really an accepted thing, or wasn't a... but they were evil. Like, I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer was a cannibalistic serial killer, and Ernst Röhm was a psychopathic leader of the SA, which were basically sort of like early SS extremists, far right militia of the Nazis, right? So what I'm saying by bringing up these two incredibly disturbing and evil people who just happen to be gay is that I think, how can you essentialize, like, you can essentialize the part of, like, it's true that gay people have been oppressed by homophobia and that sort of attitude across time. That is a fact. So, like, I'm not one of those people who disagrees with pride, for example. I think it's very, very important that the gay community and the queer community should have a space to be able to celebrate how far they've come on, because there are plenty of people who do want to drag us back into the 50 years ago, and then that would mean lots of people not having to live out in the open, and that would be terrible, obviously. But on the flip side, also, I think the essentializing of gay identity into, like, having some sort of like gay people are just like anyone else. So that's obviously being gay would become part of your identity and it would be part of your person. It's a part of it's your sexuality. You know, it's who you're attracted to, which obviously has a bearing on your life. But I think what sometimes gets lost is that, and people do this a lot with lots of different things. They do it with race as well, ethnicity. So, and then that's complicated. In some ways, it's even more complicated than sexuality. But again, people can essentialize characteristics and it becomes almost like another form of stereotyping. And I think in some respects, it's almost an infantilization, like, right? So, the idea that every gay person is like an oppressed victim is just, it's almost insulting, really. Because, again, like, any person with any sexuality, there's going to be a broad diversity of psychologies, abnormal psychologies, and all the rest of it. Like you get in any distribution of people. So I just think essentializing and putting almost on a pedestal certain identities to the detriment of others is just, again, I just think it serves nobody, and it's just a bit silly, really. And I feel that's one of the main issues you're always going to have with identity politics in general. Is like, obviously, like, somebody's sexuality can be an important part of how they identify and how they move through the world. But for a lot of people, it really isn't that important. Like, it's just a part of their life that it's just a reality, really. So I don't know what else we want to talk about. I mean, one thing I would say though, actually, is that obviously there is the right are definitely using outlier cases in the trans community, for example, where you've had sexual abuse in women's spaces as a again, it's almost doing the same thing in the opposite direction, where they're painting an entire marginalised minority group as there's this, sinister aspect to it, rather than, and then they can point to a few, I don't know, like very isolated cases of genuine sexual predators who are basically, in some respects, they're using transness as a way to access spaces, but they're not really trans. It's more like predatory. I don't know. That's a really heated subject, obviously, but then again, it's in the negative sense. It's essentializing an entire complex, diverse group of people down into a stereotype. I mean, you had the same thing with, I guess, with gay men as well, where back before, really, like, well, a lot of the 80s and 70s, I think, where they're often painted as predatory paedophiles, really. I think that was often the thing back in the 60s and the 70s, and it was almost, it was like there was a lot of that in certainly Western culture, definitely. I don't know. I wasn't really alive then, so I wouldn't know, but just based on things I've seen and read about it. I don't know where I can go from here, really. I just wanted to, like, sort of explore, like, some of those issues and talk about them. I mean, in terms of my own identity, like, I think it's a weird one for me, because, like, I'm pretty much, I'm mostly straight, like, aligned, really. But I definitely have somewhat of a bisexual nature, but definitely a bit more stronger on, like, being typically attracted to femininity, I suppose. But there's a bit of fluidity there as well. But I don't also tend to talk about it very much, because it's just not really, for me personally, it doesn't really feel like that of a, it's not really a strong part of my identity. Like, I've always known gay and lesbian or trans people and stuff, but it doesn't really feel like something that important to me. And like I said, like, I've had, like, most of my sexual experiences have been with women, but I've also had other experiences as well. So yeah, I wouldn't say I'm like completely straight, basically. But I've never. I mean, I came to terms with that when I was like 15 or something like that. So I'm almost 40 now. So It's never really been something that's particularly bothered me. But again, also because of that, it's also not something that I really like value that much, really, or just it doesn't really, I again, going back to essentialising it, like it's not, I don't really go around wearing it like a badge of honour or anything. It's just, if someone asks me about it, like, then I'm always willing to talk about sexuality and my sexual preferences, but I just don't think it's as interesting as most people think it is. Like, I like to be honest, unless someone's genuinely a deviant, I don't really care what people are up to in their sex lives, you know what I mean? It shouldn't matter. I mean, that's it. That's the end goal, really. The end goal of all progressive politics, really, should be to get to the point where, unless you're having sex with animals or kids, just get on with it. Like, enjoy what you like. Don't kink shame or whatever. But, no, you're having sex with a sheep. That's bad. And you should probably stop that immediately. But, yeah. Again, I just find it quite annoying how you get there. Yeah. There's a lot of things I've said there, which is a bit rambly, but I just think essentialising is just stupid. It's like, gay people are the best, or lesbians are the best, or whatever, or like men are best, or women are best, or it's just like, no, the diversity really is our strength when it comes to being human. I mean, we need diversity. And like even so, if you take it to the other extreme, it'd be like, so you get these like weird. I mean, this is very, very fringe belief systems. So if you had like extreme like sort of idea of feminism where it's like, so we get rid of men, but then how do you reproduce? Like, there always needs to be a heterosexual reproduction, especially if we remain human anyway, basically the same form we are now. Otherwise, obviously, you won't get any natural reproduction occurring, and you could obviously create a woman-only society or something where you have scientific reproduction. But the problem with that is, like, what if you have there's a natural disaster and you lose a certain level of technology? This is why any natural reproduction system is always going to be in place, which would involve a heterosexual sex, right? Because, and again, this is not to say that therefore means it's the best form of sexual expression. It isn't. It's just the most common one, right? Because it just is, because our survival depends on it. Now, again, we live in a civilization and a society that doesn't denigrate people who are outside of the norm, and those people are valuable. I mean, some of the most valuable contributors from science have been gay as well. So, of course, like Alan Turing is a very common example, and lots of cultural creators and musicians and are great artists, and Da Vinci probably, I think. Or Michelangelo. I don't know about Da Vinci actually. Michelangelo definitely, I think, was at least bi or gay. A lot of philosophers in Greece as well. But yeah, I don't know. I think essentially any healthy society. I'm going to try and keep this to 20 minutes. I like rambling. I think any healthy civilization allows for different varying forms of sexual expression and isn't really too. I mean, one of the weird things I actually find about like the conservative angle on this whole thing is they seem to be going down this whole it's a social contagion sort of narrative with especially with trans identity. Now, which is quite a difficult one to try and pass, actually, because I mean, I really don't know, but I don't think it's. I think there's like a very small amount of an effect of social contagion with, 13-year-olds thinking that they're trans because they watch videos on TikTok or whatever. But I think that's devaluing what I imagine transness is, because it's an internal feeling, right? I'm assuming. Like, I'm not trans, so I don't know, but I'm assuming you'd have to have a very strong. Firstly, a strong disgust at your own body or your own natural, like, you're just the body you're in. That's which I can't understand. Like, and then secondly, there's obviously a huge internal drive to change that, like, and be, it doesn't feel comfortable. Now, obviously, I get that there can be some mix up here, because when you're a teenager, you're coming into your body's becoming into maturity, and it's coming into, you're basically becoming an adult body, which is a difficult process. I remember it myself. I remember feeling like my body was going out of shape. I had a bit of mild body dysmorphia, actually, I'd say, when I was a teenager, where, because I was quite lanky, tall, but I felt like as I was starting to develop into an adolescent, wasn't easy, but I never really confused that for like not feeling like I was in the right body. It was more just like getting used to a new stretched body and growing hairs everywhere and stuff, and it's a very different thing, and it's a typical thing, right? But I think it's weird how a lot of the conservative like culture war has hyper focused on this issue. And now, like, I've talked previously in other videos about how I do think we have to stop and pause, like, with things like hormone blockers. Maybe there has been a bit of an excessive use of that, and but again, it's not really my area of expertise. But I think it is strange how conservatives are sort of latched onto this and seem to be really pushing this anti-trans sort of beliefs, really, because it's, again, we're talking, it's a very small minority of people who are trans in one form or another, whether that be they're non-binary, whether it be that they're transgender, as in like having surgeries. And the other thing as well is people talking like this is a new phenomenon, but there has been for centuries these forms of people who either don't fit into or are androgynous in one sense or another, and people who are genuinely, I mean, the first sex change operation I think was done in the early 20th century, like as in an actual surgery to, I think that's the 20th century. He's actually an artist. It's quite an interesting story. So it's not particularly even that new. And like the, again, I don't know. I don't really understand why it's been so. I mean, I guess if you're cynical, you could say, well, it's just an easy. There's a lot of things going wrong. It's like an easy distraction for people to point and look. Haha! Look at these weirdos. It could be, so maybe if I have conservative governments in power, maybe they want to just ostracize different groups and create an out group. But then not all conservatives, to be fair, I'm going to try and be a bit balanced. There are some conservatives who are very not into this whole narrative. So, in fact, well, funnily enough, actually, going back to Douglas Murray is actually one he's a gay man actually, but he pushes this trans thing a lot and in the negative. Sometimes I find him kind of interesting to listen to. I don't agree with hardly anything he says, but he is an intellectual on the right that I can at least listen to as a challenge and get something from. Sometimes, like I say, often I will not agree with what he's saying, but I don't know. I've rambled around a lot there, but basically there's a few more thoughts just on how I think sometimes we can essentialize the importance of aspects of our identity too much. We are, after all, individuals. And, basically the only things that really matter that we do in life are based on what we do as individuals with our own will, I suppose. What do we actually create out of our own chaos rather than, I'm a gay man or I'm a lesbian woman or whatever. Now, that's obviously interesting as part of your life, and I'm not going to devalue it, but it's probably not the most interesting thing about a person, I don't think. And I think if we get to the stage as human beings where we just it's almost like okay, fair enough, whatever, then I think we're probably winning. Where it just doesn't matter, where you have people who just don't care. So instead of people banging on constantly about how they're gay or bi or trans, it's like, all right, fair enough, let's go on to the next thing. You know what I mean? Rather than hyper focusing on it. Now I get that some people might get that, some of you might not understand that, but that's just sort of my perspective on it. In some ways, I'd probably get critiqued by people saying that's so much of a liberal position. It's like the cult of the individual rather than. But I don't really think it is, really. I mean, it sort of is, but it's influenced definitely by a certain form of classical liberalism. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what are you going to be remembered for in the world, and what are you going to be for what you did? And that could be around your identity as well. Maybe you do activism around it. That's a completely legitimate thing as well, of course. But I don't know. Bit of a ramble there. I'll leave it.